The rain on the window of the downtown loft did not fall so much as it seeped, a gray bleed against the glass that mirrored the dissolution happening within. Juliet watched it, her posture deceptively calm in the sleek armchair her brother Leo could never have afforded. This was not her world. The clean lines, the oppressive quiet, the scent of leather and expensive polish, it was a stage set for a performance of power, and she was the prop waiting to be positioned. Her mind, an instrument honed by necessity, was not on the view. It was cataloging exits: 1. The elevator, potential weapons, a heavy crystal ashtray, the steel letter opener on the desk, and the precise, trembling frequency of Leo's breathing as he paced a worn track into the Persian rug. He was a ghost of the brother who'd taught her to shuffle a deck with fluid grace. Now his hands, those once clever hands, fluttered like wounded birds, scratching at the track marks on his forearms beneath his too-thin jacket. His debt was a living thing in the room, a third presence more substantial than he was. "He'll understand, Jules, he's a businessman," Leo whispered, for the 10th time. "It's a temporary arrangement. A gesture of good faith." Juliet said nothing. Good faith had evaporated from their lives years ago, leaving behind the bitter residue of empty promises and stolen heirlooms. She had known the destination the moment Leo, tears of pathetic relief in his eyes, had begged her to come with him to sort things out. She had come not out of hope, but out of a final, grim calculus. It was better to face the devil knowing he was there than to be snatched from her waitressing job in the dead of night. The elevator chimed, a soft, lethal sound. Leo jumped as if struck. The door slid open, and 2 men emerged first. They were not brutes, they were elegant, their suits tailored, their eyes performing a swift, impersonal scan of the room before they stepped aside. And then he entered. Kieran. He carried the silence in with him. He was younger than she expected, but his youth was rendered irrelevant by an aura of absolute containment. His hair was dark, his suit a shade of charcoal that seemed to absorb the muted light. His gaze passed over Leo as if he were a stain on the air, and settled on Juliet. There was no leer in it, no overt cruelty. It was the assessing look of a collector considering an acquisition, evaluating line, condition, and potential utility. "Leo," Kieran said, his voice a low, even baritone that demanded the silence tighten around it. "You've brought the agreed-upon collateral." She's my sister, Kieran. She's good people," Leo stammered, wringing his hands. "She is a unit of currency," Kieran corrected, his tone devoid of malice. It was a simple statement of fact. "You pledged her in lieu of your left hand, which was the original terms. I found this alternative more aesthetically pleasing." His eyes never left Juliet. "Stand up." It was not a shout. It was quieter than Leo's pleading. It was infinitely more powerful. Juliet felt it in her bones, a command that bypassed thought and triggered instinct. She rose, her movements deliberate, betraying none of the cold fury crystallizing inside her. She met his gaze, refusing to look down. He closed the distance between them, a slow predator's walk. He circled her, not touching, but his attention was a physical pressure. He studied the line of her neck, the set of her shoulders, the simple cotton of her dress. "You understand the terms?" he asked, now standing before her again. "My brother's debt transfers to me," she said, her own voice surprisingly steady. "I belong to you until you deem it paid." A faint, almost imperceptible flicker in his eyes acknowledged her lack of hysterics. "Belong is a broad term. I have a specific use in mind. I've had a run of poor variants at certain tables. Bad luck." He said the word with distaste, as if it were a flaw in the universe's logic. "Some men carry a rabbit's foot. I prefer something with more presence. You will be my lucky charm. You will sit beside me. You will be quiet. You will be seen. Your presence will shift the tides." The absurdity of it was almost laughable. He was a man who clearly dealt in violence and numbers, yet he trafficked in superstition. It was a vulnerability, a crack in his armor so childish it was shocking. Juliet filed it away. Leo was sobbing now, messy, guilt-ridden sounds. "Juliet, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." Kieran nodded to one of his men, who took Leo by the elbow and guided him, still babbling, toward the elevator. Leo did not look back. The doors closed on his shame, leaving Juliet alone with her new owner. "Your things?" Kieran asked. "This is all I came with." He gave another nod, this time of approval. "Good. We will provide what you need. He stepped closer, and his hand came up to her face. She forced herself not to flinch. His fingers, cool and dry, brushed a strand of hair behind her ear, then trailed down to tilt her chin up. The touch was clinical, yet profoundly possessive. You will be beautiful, and you will be silent, and you will be lucky. Those are your only responsibilities. Disobedience has consequences. Do you understand? In that moment, she understood everything. She was not a person to him. She was an ornament, a talisman. A thing to be polished and positioned for his benefit. The fury within her turned ice-cold, sharp, and purposeful. I understand, she said. He held her gaze for a long moment, searching for defiance, for fear. She showed him nothing but a placid, empty surface. Finally, he turned. Bring her, he said to the remaining man, and walked toward the elevator. They descended to a black sedan. She was placed in the back beside Kieran. The driver pulled into the rainy night, moving toward a part of the city where the lights were brighter and the shadows deeper. He did not speak to her. He examined a tablet, the glow illuminating the sharp planes of his face. They arrived at a building that spoke of old money and discreet security. The apartment they entered was vast, a study in monochrome and steel. It was beautiful and utterly soulless. A female attendant, silent and efficient, appeared. Mara will show you to your room. You will dine with me at 8. Wear this. He gestured to a garment bag already laid across a chaise lounge. It contained a dress of emerald silk, the exact color of a felt poker table. Her room was a gilded cage. A large bed, a lavish ensuite, a window with a staggering view of the city's glittering spine. And a door, left ajar, that connected directly to what she presumed was his bedroom. She tested it. It opened smoothly to her touch, but she saw it had no lock on her side. On his side, it would be a different matter. The message was clear, her space was contingent, permeable by his will alone. At 8, she emerged in the emerald dress. It fit as if it were made for her, which it likely was. He stood by the window, a glass of amber liquid in hand. He turned, and his eyes traveled over her. Again, it was not the look of a man admiring a woman, but of an owner assessing an asset's presentation. Acceptable, he pronounced. Dinner was a silent affair of exquisite food she barely tasted. He asked no questions, offered no conversation. He was training her to the silence he required. Her first game was that same night. A private club, thick with cigar smoke and the whisper of shifting fortunes. The men at the table were variations of Kieran, powerful, guarded, dangerous. She was placed on a plush chair just behind and to his right, within the circle of his arm. His hand came to rest on the back of her chair, then, as the first cards were dealt, settled on her bare shoulder. His touch was a brand, a constant, warm reminder of her status. She became a statue, breathing evenly, her eyes lowered demurely. But behind the facade, her mind roared to life. She watched the dealers shuffle, her photographic memory capturing the sequence. She tracked the bets, the raises, the folds. She studied the players, the nervous tick of the shipping magnate, the way the tech billionaire stroked his chips when bluffing. And she studied Kieran. He played with aggressive confidence, but it was a blunt instrument. He relied on intimidation and the size of his stack, missing the subtle layers of the game. He won a few pots, lost others. The night was even. But then, during a critical hand, a flush draw looming, she felt the tension in his fingers on her shoulder. He was considering a reckless call. Unconsciously, her hand went to the simple chain at her throat, a nervous habit, her fingers worrying the small pendant. Kieran's eyes flicked from his cards to her hand, then back to the pot. He folded. The next player revealed the flush. Kieran had avoided a devastating loss. As the pot was swept away from his rival, Kieran's hand left her shoulder. He lifted his own hand, cupped her cheek, and turned her face toward him. His thumb brushed her cheekbone. A chill ran down her spine that had nothing to do with fear. You see, he murmured, his voice for her alone. A dark, intimate satisfaction glittered in his eyes. He leaned in and pressed a kiss to her forehead. His lips were cool, the gesture terrifying in its absolute ownership. My luck is changing. Juliet sat perfectly still, the phantom touch burning on her skin. Inside, the ice locked tighter around her heart. He had seen a signal where there was only a habit. He believed in the charm. He was attributing his own, perhaps wiser, hesitation to her presence. As he turned back to the table, a new stack of chips placed before him, the first true plan formed in the silence of her mind. It was fragile, dangerous, and born of cold observation. Let him believe, she thought, the city's lights blurring into streaks of gold beyond the window. Let him believe in the charm. I will learn the game. I will learn him. And I will use his own superstition to break his control. The stakes were no longer just money. They were her future, and she had just been dealt her first hidden card. A fragile, unspoken rhythm established itself in the gilded cage of Kieran's world. Days bled into a structured monotony that Juliet used as a canvas for her silent study. Mornings were spent in the sunlit prison of her room, or under the watchful eye of Mara in the curated boutiques, where her wardrobe expanded into a collection of weapons-grade silk and cashmere. Each garment was chosen by Kieran, each one a deliberate costume for his narrative, the lucky charm. The emerald dress was joined by sapphire blue, ruby red, the black of a midnight ocean, colors that made her a vivid, silent stroke against the somber backgrounds of the high-stakes rooms she inhabited. Kieran's superstition, once a vague vulnerability, hardened into ritual. He began to dictate not just what she wore, but how she wore it. A specific perfume, faint and botanical. Her hair always down, a dark cascade he would occasionally thread his fingers through absently, as one might pet a cat, while contemplating a hand. His touch was constant, the guiding hand on her lower back that propelled her through rooms, the possessive curl of his arm around her waist as he exchanged pleasantries with other men whose eyes held a knowing, envious gleam. She was his visible edge, his human rabbit's foot, and the more he won, the more sacred the ritual became. The winning, however, was not a straight line. Variance, as Kieran called it with a clenched jaw, still played its fickle part. It was during a smaller, yet tense game in a private drawing room that Juliet saw the first crack in his controlled demeanor. The opponent was a man named Ryland, with a voice like gravel and a reputation for dirty business. Kieran was down significantly, his aggression turning brittle. Ryland, sensing blood, leaned back, a cigar clamped between his teeth, and let his gaze linger on Juliet with a slow, insolent appraisal. Perhaps the charms lost its shine, Ryland mused, smoke curling toward the ceiling. Or perhaps it was never hers to begin with. Maybe the lady's sending her own signals. A pretty distraction working for the house, so to speak. The room froze. The accusation was not just about cheating, it was a challenge to Kieran's judgment, his control, his property. Kieran went very still, the kind of stillness that comes before an explosion. Juliet felt the air evacuate the room. Kieran's hand, which had been resting on the back of her chair, slowly curled into a fist, the knuckles bleaching white. "Apologize," Kieran said, the words so soft they were almost lost in the crackle of the fireplace. Ryland laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "For stating a possibility? This is business. Due diligence." What happened next was a blur of efficient violence. Kieran didn't shout. He simply moved. A glass shattered. There was a grunt, the thud of a body against wood paneling, and the sickening crunch of cartilage. It was over in seconds, Kieran's men materializing to haul a bleeding, dazed Ryland from the room. Kieran stood over the wreckage, breathing lightly, adjusting his cufflink where a spot of blood, not his own, had marred the linen. His anger was a cold, contained fire, more terrifying for its precision. He turned to Juliet. His eyes were black pools, unreadable. He saw her pressed back into her chair, her hand clasped around her own forearm where a shard of flying crystal had nicked a thin, red line just above her wrist. He stared at the wound as if it were a profound insult. Without a word, he took her elbow and guided her from the room, leaving the silent, stunned game behind. In the bathroom of his apartment, under the harsh, clinical light, the aftermath unfolded. He was silent as he opened a polished mahogany case, extracting antiseptic and gauze. His earlier fury was gone, replaced by a focused intensity. "Give me your arm," he said, not unkindly. She extended it. His fingers, now clean and steady, were warm as they cradled her wrist. He cleaned the cut, his touch surprisingly deft, almost gentle. The juxtaposition was violently dissonant, the man who had just shattered a man's face with ruthless economy, now ministering to a minor scratch with meticulous care. He taped the gauze in place, his thumb brushing over the edge of it. The intimacy of the act, the quiet of the room, the scent of his cologne mixed with antiseptic, it created a confusing, treacherous warmth in her chest. She hated it. She feared it more than his anger. "He looked at you," Kieran said finally, his voice low. "He implied you were disloyal. That cannot stand." He wasn't justifying himself to her, he was stating a law of his universe. Her loyalty was an extension of his ownership, and both were inviolable. The incident changed the dynamic. The following night, in his study, he didn't dismiss her after dinner. Instead, he gestured to a chair opposite his massive desk. "Sit." He poured 2 glasses of brandy, pushing one toward her. Ryland was a fool, but he was observant in his way. "You watch the games. What do you see?" It was a test, deeper than any before. She chose her words like selecting cards for a delicate bluff. "I see patterns. The way the man from the shipping company folds when he's truly strong, not weak. The way the banker touches his wedding ring when he's anxious. She paused, meeting his gaze. "You play to dominate the table, not just the hand. It makes you predictable in high-pressure moments. You push when a softer approach might lure in more." He stared at her, his expression inscrutable. Then, a slow, genuine smile touched his lips, the first she'd ever seen that wasn't a smirk of victory. It transformed his face, revealing a sharp, arresting intelligence that was far more dangerous than his superstition. "A good people reader," he echoed, his eyes gleaming. Indeed. This became the new ritual. Late nights in the study, with ledgers and tournament summaries spread before them. He began to explain his deeper strategy, the financial architectures behind the games, the rivalries and alliances that colored every bet. He spoke of Silas, the Kingpin, with a mixture of respect and simmering ambition. "He is a monument," Kieran said, swirling his brandy. "But monuments can be toppled by erosion, not just quakes." He also spoke, with cold contempt, of addicts like her brother. "They are equations with a leaking variable. Unreliable. They trade lasting power for a fleeting sensation. It's the most profound stupidity." In these sessions, Juliet felt the insidious shift. The intellectual intimacy was a drug. She was using her mind again, not just her memory, but her strategic instinct, and he was not just listening, he was valuing it. The line between captor and collaborator began to smudge. She found herself anticipating these hours, the charged silence between them filling with a mutual recognition of cunning. The true crucible arrived a week later. The game was the biggest yet, the central table at the View Care Club, where the buy-in was a deed to a city block. Silas himself was in attendance, a monolith of quiet power observing from a mezzanine. The final hand came down to Kieran and Silas's right-hand man, a hawk-faced card genius named Victor. The pot was astronomical. The board showed a possible straight, a possible flush. Juliet, from her place beside Kieran, had tracked every card. She had also caught Victor's tell, an almost imperceptible flutter of his left eyelid when he was truly, dangerously strong. It had happened once before, hours ago, and she had logged it. Now, as Victor pushed a massive stack of chips forward, his eyelid flickered. Kieran was holding a strong hand, a king-high flush. It was a winning hand, unless Victor had the single card that made a straight flush, the only thing that could beat him. The odds were minuscule. But Victor's tell screamed certainty. Kieran's fingers rested on his chips, ready to call. He was going to do it. He was going to risk everything on variance, on ego, on the belief that his luck, with her beside him, was infallible. A silent scream echoed in Juliet's mind. It was a pivot point, not just for the money, but for everything. If he lost here, crushed by Silas's man, his superstition might shatter, and with it, her nascent, fragile position as more than a charm. He would become volatile, dangerous in a new, unpredictable way. She had to act, but speaking was forbidden. As Kieran drew a breath to speak, she moved. Not much. Just her eyes. She turned her head slightly and met his gaze. In that split second, she let every ounce of the analytical partner from the study show in her face. She let the charm facade fall completely away, revealing the card sharp beneath. And she gave a single, deliberate, almost microscopic shake of her head. No. Kieran's words died in his throat. He looked at her, really looked, and saw not his superstitious anchor, but his strategic ally. The moment hung suspended on a razor's edge. Then, with a tension that vibrated through the air, he exhaled. "Fold," he said, his voice rough. He turned his cards face down. Victor's hawk face remained impassive, but a flicker of surprise, quickly masked, crossed his eyes. He revealed his cards. He had been bluffing, holding a mere pair. Kieran's king-high flush would have annihilated him. But Victor did not have the straight flush. The tell had been a red herring, a masterful piece of deception. Yet, by folding, Kieran had saved his fortune. A bluff that powerful would have been a crippling, reputation-destroying call. The room erupted in murmured astonishment. Kieran sat back, a storm gathering behind his eyes. He had not lost, but he had not won on his own terms. He had heeded her, and it had been the right, if humbling, move. After the game, in the silent car, the tension was a living thing. He didn't touch her. He stared out the window, his jaw working. Once in the study, he poured a drink and downed it. "How did you know?" he finally asked, his back to her. "I didn't know," she said, her own voice quiet in the vast room. "I observed. He had a tell. I believed it. It was a calculated risk." He turned, his gaze burning into her. "A calculated risk. You read him. You read me. And you acted. You broke the rule of silence. To save you from a mistake. To save yourself," he corrected, but there was no heat in it. He was dissecting her, and the discovery was intoxicating him. "You're not just a reader of people. You're a player. And you've been playing from the very first night, haven't you?" This was the precipice. She gave another half-truth, the only currency she had. "I told you. I'm a good people reader. My brother, he liked to gamble. I learned to watch, to survive it." He crossed the room until he stood before her, so close she could see the flecks of iron gray in his eyes. The air crackled with the shared knowledge of the unspoken partnership that had just been forged in fire. The trust was not warm, nor was it soft. It was a hard, metallic thing, forged in mutual utility and the shock of recognition. He saw her now, truly saw her, and the ownership in his eyes had morphed into something more complex, more terrifying, and infinitely more dangerous, a possessive, intrigued respect. The charm was broken. In its place stood a woman he could not predict, and a dynamic that had just been irrevocably altered. The frost that settled between them after the victor hand was not born of anger, but of a profound and mutual recalibration. The silent drives home, the meals where cutlery was the only conversation, these were not punishments, but the heavy quiet of two strategists reassessing the board. Kieran's gaze, when it fell upon her, had shed its veneer of mere possession. Now it was analytical, probing, tinged with a wary fascination. She was no longer a simple variable in his superstitious equation, she was an equation herself, one he was determined to solve. The new tutelage began without announcement. The late-night sessions in the study deepened, shifting from passive observation to active training. He presented her with complex probability scenarios, historical hands from legendary games, dossiers on their regular opponents filled with financial holdings, psychological profiles, and known vices. "Silas believes power is a throne," Kieran explained one night, his finger tracing a line of text about the Kingpin's early days. "I believe it is a language. Money, fear, information, they are just dialects. The game is the truest dialect of all. It lays a man's soul bare on green felt." He was teaching her his language, and in doing so, he was giving her the keys to his own soul's architecture. The intimacy was terrifying in its completeness. She saw his ambitions laid bare, not just wealth, but a legacy. Not just to serve Silas, but to eclipse him. And she saw, with chilling clarity, his utter contempt for weakness, which he defined as any loss of control, over others, over circumstances, over oneself. It was this contempt that fueled the first real collision of their new dynamic. He had prosived a file, tossing it onto the desk before her. It was Leo's updated dossier. Photos of him, looking more hollowed out, in debt to new, more violent corners of the city. "The leaking variable continues to leak," Kieran said, his voice devoid of sympathy. "He will be dead by winter, and the city will be cleaner for it. Your sentiment for him is a flaw in your own logic, Juliet. One I suggest you correct." The cold finality of it, the dismissal of the brother who had been her first family, her first betrayer, ignited a white-hot fury in her chest. "He is a symptom, not the disease," she heard herself retort, her voice sharper than she intended. "You trade in debts and leverage, and you call him weak. He's just worse at the math." Kieran's eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in intense interest. "You defend him? After what he did?" I understand the transaction, she said, locking her emotions away. I am clarifying the terms. My value to you is here. She tapped her temple. Not in my past. My past is what made me able to sit here and read Victor for you. Erode that, and you erode your own edge. He was silent for a long moment, then gave a slow, approving nod. The confrontation ended not with a victory, but with a deeper, more unsettling understanding. He valued her spine, even when it turned against his pronouncements. The blurring of the line became a slow, inexorable flood. The intellectual intimacy bred a physical awareness that hummed just beneath the surface of every shared glance, every accidental brush of fingers over a poker chip case. It culminated after a brutal, 12-hour game against a consortium of Hong Kong investors. They had won, not on luck, but on a complex, multi-layered bluff they had designed together in the study the night before. The adrenaline of the shared victory was a potent, dizzying drug. Back in the apartment, still thrumming with nervous energy, he poured 2 glasses of a rare, smoky scotch. They stood on the terrace, the city sprawled beneath them like a captured kingdom. He spoke of his plans, his vision for the empire he would build, and for the first time, he used the word we. With your mind in my reach, he said, his voice low with intensity, there are no limits. The shared ambition, the intoxication of the win, the proximity in the dark, it created a gravity that pulled them together. When he turned to her, his eyes were no longer those of a collector or a tutor. They held a raw, hungry heat that mirrored the coil of desire tightening in her own gut. The first kiss was not gentle. It was a clash, a battle for dominance fought with lips and teeth and tangled breath. It was possession and surrender, fury and fascination, all distilled into a single, devastating point of contact. Her hands fisted in his shirt, not to push away, but to anchor herself against the tidal wave of sensation. He tasted of scotch and victory and something uniquely, dangerously Kieran. And as suddenly as it began, it ended. He broke away, his breathing ragged, his expression stark with a kind of horrified revelation. He took a full step back, the night air rushing into the space between them like a shock of cold water. Without a word, he turned and walked inside, leaving her alone on the terrace, her lips burning, her body trembling, her mind a chaotic riot of triumph and self-loathing. She had felt it too, the terrifying pull, the unwanted rightness of it. She had kissed her captor, and a part of her had reveled in it. The line wasn't just blurred, it was obliterated. The morning brought a return to icy, formal distance. The incident was never mentioned, but it lived in the space between every word, every look. It was into this fragile, charged silence that the past intruded, venomous and desperate. A burner phone, left in the pocket of a coat delivered from a cleaner she hadn't requested. A single, saved number. She knew who it was before she heard the broken, wheedling voice on the other end. Jules? Jules, thank God. It's me. I'm in deep. Deeper than before. These guys, they're not like Kieran, they're animals. They'll kill me. You have to help me. Leo's voice was a rasp of pure panic. The old, weary guilt twisted in her, but it was quickly strangled by a fresher, sharper hatred. He had sold her, and now he came begging. I have nothing, Leo. I am nothing here. Just a piece of furniture. Don't lie, he hissed, a spark of his old manipulation flaring. I hear things. He keeps you close. You have his ear. You have influence. Get me 200,000. Just to clear this debt. Then I disappear, I swear. Or what? She asked, her voice deadly calm. A pause. Then, the betrayal, predictable and pathetic. Or I tell your mafia prince exactly what he's got sitting pretty next to him. I tell him about the underground rings in Philly. About the Sphinx they called you, because you never blinked and you always knew the count. I tell him his lucky charm is a card sharp who could clean him out blind if she wanted to. How long do you think you'll last when he knows you've been playing him from day one? The threat hung in the air, cold and final. He had boxed her in. The truth, revealed in anger or as a weapon from Leo, would destroy the fragile trust she'd built. Kieran would see it not as survival, but as the ultimate deception. His prized asset, his intriguing partner, would be revealed as a fraud, a viper he'd brought to his breast. The punishment would be unimaginable. For 3 days, she carried the acid secret in her gut, watching Kieran, studying the hard line of his profile as he read, the confident set of his shoulders. The trust between them was a thin, precious pane of glass, and Leo was a hammer swinging toward it. She knew then, with absolute certainty, that she could not control Leo. The leaking variable would always leak. The only way to seal the breach was to control the narrative herself. It was the biggest gamble of her life. She chose her moment after another winning night, when the satisfaction of shared success was a soft glow in the room. He was pouring a nightcap, his guard perhaps a fraction down. "Kieran," she said, her voice clear in the quiet. "We need to talk about my brother." He turned, his expression neutral. "I told you. He is not your concern. He has made himself my concern." And she laid it out. Not as a confession, but as a strategic briefing. She told him of the burner phone, the blackmail, the demanded sum. She watched the neutrality on his face harden into granite as she spoke. Then, she took the final, breathtaking leap. "And his threat has merit. Because what he threatens to tell you is the truth." She told him everything. The backrooms of Philadelphia, the years of watching, counting, surviving. The nickname, the Sphinx. She explained her silence at the first game, her conscious decision to let his superstition stand, her gradual, calculated revelation of her skills. She laid her entire history on the table between them, a final, all-in bet. His face was a mask of chilling stillness. The glass in his hand was perfectly steady, but she could see a storm gathering in the depths of his eyes, betrayal, fury, but also, crucially, a dawning, staggering comprehension. He saw the entire chain of events, from her first night forward, in a new, glaring light. "You lied," he stated, the words flat. "I survived," she corrected, holding his gaze. "And then I collaborated. The skills I hid are the same skills that saved you from Victor. They are my value. Not luck. Never luck." The silence stretched, taut enough to snap. She could see him warring with it, the outrage of being deceived battling against the undeniable evidence of her utility, and the raw, inconvenient truth of whatever had passed between them on the terrace. Finally, he spoke, his voice a low, dangerous rasp. "So. You are not my lucky charm. You are a fox in the henhouse." "I am a fox," she agreed, her heart hammering against her ribs. "And you are about to face a wolf. Silas. The game at the end of the month. The one for the docks. Let me play. Not as your charm, but as your weapon." He laughed, a short, bitter sound. "You? Give me a stake. I will win the 200,000 for Leo's debt from Silas's own table. I will pay off the leaking variable and silence him for good." She drew a sharp breath, pushing her entire stack of chips into the center of this existential table. "My wager is this: if I win the money from his game, my debt to you is transferred. You release me. I walk away, and the fox leaves your henhouse forever." The air left the room. The finality of her offer hung between them, a guillotine blade. His eyes searched hers, looking for a bluff, finding only a desperate, fearless certainty. "And if you lose?" he asked, the question a velvet-covered threat. "Then I lose everything," she said softly. "I belong to you, completely. Not as a charm, not as a partner. Body, soul, will. Forever. No more secrets, no more negotiations. I become exactly what you bought on the first day, a possession." It was the ultimate dark bargain. Freedom versus absolute, eternal ownership. She was offering him a choice: relinquish her as an equal, or claim her as a ultimate prize. He stared at her for an eternity, his gaze carving into the very core of her. He saw not just the card sharp, but the woman who had kissed him back with furious passion. He saw his greatest asset and his greatest risk, packaged together. A slow, grim smile touched his lips, devoid of warmth but full of a terrible, admiring respect. "All right, Sphinx," he said, "the name a concession and a brand. You have your wager. You will play for Silas's money. You win, you buy your brother's life and your freedom. You lose," he let the sentence hang, the promise in his eyes more binding than any contract. The fragile, hard-won trust had been shattered and remade, in that moment, into something else entirely, a perilous, all-or-nothing pact, sealed with the ghost of a kiss and the cold steel of a bargain. The game was no longer just about money or power. It was for her very soul, and he had just called her bet. The air in the Ethelstan Club's main salon didn't circulate, it congealed. It was heavy with the scent of aged cognac, rare cigars, and the ozone burn of staggering sums being vaporized and reconstituted with the turn of a card. Tonight's game wasn't entertainment, it was a tribunal. The prize was the operational rights to the city's North Docks, a strategic artery worth tens of millions annually. But for Juliet, standing beside Kieran at the entrance, the only prize was a number, 200,000. The price of a ghost silence and a lock on a gilded cage. Kieran had prepared her for this moment with the intensity of a general before a siege. He'd provided her with a gown of deepest burgundy, the color of drying blood, its severe lines projecting an authority that belied her position. "You are not a charm tonight," he'd said, his fingers lingering on her spine as he fastened the clasp of a simple diamond pendant, not a lucky piece, but a cold, clear stone. "You are a declaration. My declaration." The possessive pronoun hung between them, fraught with the dual meanings of their wager. He led her to the table. It was rimmed with the city's most dangerous men, but at its head sat Silas. The Kingpin was older, his power not in restless energy like Kieran's, but in a monumental stillness, as if he had become part of the room's architecture. His gaze, when it passed over Juliet, was dismissive, seeing only Kieran's predictable ornament. That dismissal was her first advantage. Kieran took his seat. Juliet's chair was placed not behind him, but slightly to the side, in the peripheral vision of every player. A psychological placement, forcing her into the game's sightlines. The initial rounds were a predatory ballet. Juliet played, her mind a silent, humming machine of calculation and observation. She felt Kieran's focus like a physical touch, a mixture of scrutiny and a simmering, protective intensity that was new and disorienting. She won steadily, but conservatively, building her stack brick by brick, inching toward the target that meant freedom. The dynamic shifted as the night wore on and the weaker players fell away. Soon, it was just Silas, Kieran, a steel magnate from the north, and Juliet. The real game began. Silas, realizing the woman was not merely decorative, began to engage her directly. "Your play is precise, my dear," he remarked, his voice like gravel shifting. "Unemotional. It reminds me of a system player I once had removed from a casino in Monte Carlo for counting." A threat, velvet-wrapped. Kieran's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, letting her navigate the minefield. "Emotion is a liability, Mr. Silas," she replied, her voice steady. "I prefer the clarity of numbers." As the pot grew, the psychological warfare intensified. Silas, with the effortless cruelty of a man who owned the world, leaned back during a dealer shuffle. "Ambition is a fascinating thing, Kieran. It drives men to acquire remarkable assets." His eyes flicked to Juliet. "But one must always know if the asset is truly owned, or merely on loan. I understand there was a recent issue with a leak? A family matter?" The blow landed with pinpoint accuracy. He knew about Leo. He knew about the blackmail. The room seemed to tilt. Juliet's perfect concentration fractured for a single, disastrous second. She met Kieran's eyes, searching for a tell, for a sign that this had been his plan all along, to let her play, only for Silas to expose her vulnerabilities and break her at the table. Kieran's expression was unreadable, but his eyes held hers. In their depths, she did not see the triumph of a double-cross. Instead, she saw a fierce, burning outrage, not at her, but at Silas for daring to touch what was his. And beneath the fury, something harder and more foundational, a challenge. Stay with me. Trust me, it was not a command from an owner, but a demand from a partner in the heart of the enemy's camp. The moment of crisis crystallized everything. Her plan, her wager, her desperate bid for freedom, it all narrowed to this point. Did she believe in the man, or the monster? The partner in the study, or the captor in the loft? With her future hanging in the balance, she made her choice. She gave Kieran an almost imperceptible nod, then turned her gaze back to her cards, her mask of icy composure slamming back into place. She had, in that silent exchange, placed her final bet on him. The climax came on a hand that would decide the docks. The board showed a terrifying possibility, a straight flush draw. Juliet held the king and 10 of hearts. She had a flush, a monstrous hand. But Silas was betting with the serene confidence of a man already engraving his name on the deed. The mathematical part of her mind screamed the odds. The instinctual part, the part that had learned Kieran, watched Silas's ancient, veined hands. They were too still. A man with the unbeatable hand savors the reveal, he does not will the game to end. He was manufacturing certainty. The final bet was made. The call was hers. 200,000 was a memory. Now it was for everything, the docks, Kieran standing, her soul. She looked at Kieran one last time. He was watching Silas, a predator's smile playing on his lips. He gave her a single, slight, almost imperceptible incline of his head. All in. She pushed her entire stack, every chip representing her past and her future, into the center of the universe. I call. The silence was absolute. Silas's monumental calm fractured for a microsecond, a hairline crack of surprise. He turned over his cards. He had the ace of hearts, and the queen of hearts. He had a flush as well, a higher flush. But he did not have the straight flush. He had been betting on the sheer, overwhelming power of his perceived invincibility. Juliet turned over her king-high flush. It was lower, but it was the winning hand. She had called his godlike bluff. The eruption was internal. The room remained hushed, the other players stunned. Silas stared at the cards as if they had personally betrayed him. Then, his gaze lifted to Kieran, understanding dawning. This was not a loss to a woman, it was a defeat engineered by his underboss. A new power had announced itself. Kieran rose, his movement breaking the spell. He didn't look at the mountain of chips being swept toward Juliet. His eyes were only for Silas, a look of respectful, yet unmistakable, defiance. Then he turned to Juliet. He offered her his hand, not to pull her up, but in a formal, almost archaic gesture. She placed her hand in his, and he drew her to stand beside him. In the car, the silence was different. It was charged, electric with the aftermath of a shared conquest. Back in his apartment, he went directly to the safe, withdrawing a sealed envelope thick with cash and a first-class plane ticket to Zurich. He laid them on the desk beside the diamond pendant she had removed. "The terms of the wager," he said, his voice low. "Your brother's debt, and your freedom. The flight leaves at noon." He was honoring their deal to the letter. He was setting the fox free. The victory tasted like ash. She looked at the ticket, the physical manifestation of everything she had fought for, and felt a profound, terrifying emptiness. The cage door was open, but the cage had, somewhere in the blur of late-night strategy and a single searing kiss, become her world. The man before her was no longer just her captor, he was the only person who had ever seen the Sphinx and not looked away in fear or greed. He believed in her skill, not her luck. He had trusted her with his ambition in the study, and she had trusted him with her life at the table. That hard-forged, perilous trust was a bond thicker than any chain. Slowly, deliberately, she picked up the envelope of cash. Then, she picked up the plane ticket. She didn't open it. She tore it in half, letting the pieces flutter onto the polished wood. Kieran froze, his breath catching. A storm of emotions, shock, fury, a desperate, savage hope, raged in his eyes. "What are you doing?" "The original wager was flawed," she said, her own voice clear in the vast quiet. "It was based on an old reality. I don't want freedom from you, Kieran." She stepped closer, closing the distance he had always dictated. "I want a new wager. Not for my liberty, but for my place. A partnership. An equal share of the risks, and the rewards. No more owner and owned. Just us. Against them all." For a long, suspended moment, he was utterly still. Then, a sound escaped him, something between a gasp and a laugh. The control, the careful containment that defined him, shattered. He closed the final distance, his hands coming up to cradle her face, his touch no longer that of a proprietor assessing an asset, but of a man clinging to a miracle. "The most dangerous bet I will ever make," he murmured against her lips, his voice thick with a surrender that was its own kind of victory. His kiss was not a brand of ownership, but a seal on a treaty. It was a promise of wars to be waged side by side, of empires to be built on a foundation of mutual respect and dark, unwavering trust. The story of the captive and the captor was over. In its place began the far more dangerous legend of the partnership forged in deception, tempered in fire, and bound by a love as complex and all-in as the game that had created it. They had gone all in on the table, and now, they were all in on each other. The game, for them, was just beginning. Want to witness the next high-stakes play in their dangerous partnership? Subscribe for alerts when the next chapter in their story is revealed ***.